this path of practice, this Dharma path, this path of self-inquiry, looking into the nature of what it is we are, it's important to know that it's not a straight line. There are times when we feel really connected with the practice. There are days when we feel really connected with the practice. And there are times where we don't feel very connected with the practice, where we lose it. The important thing is to keep it going, is to practice every day. And even if you don't have time to do a formal sit, to really bring that sense of mindfulness and that sense of awareness and compassion into your daily life. When we work with it on a daily basis, you start to see you have good days and you have bad days. But the work, as long as we continue to apply ourselves, the work is never lost. That's really important to remember that. Sometimes I know after a retreat, people get frustrated with themselves because they lose that clarity, or they lose that calm, or that sense of groundedness or openness. And that's to be expected. But when we keep the practice going on a daily basis, it comes back. It comes back. So we continually, day after day, we reapply ourselves. And if you think about it, what else is there to do? I mean, we have our daily lives, and we have our duties and our obligations and our relationships and our pursuits, and all that is fine. But this pursuit is a pursuit of understanding. It's a pursuit of wisdom. It's a pursuit of opening up in a really deep way to what our experience is. And when we're not moving to awakening, we're just lost in habitual patterns. There's a line in a Bob Dylan song that I like to quote: "He not busy being born is busy dying." And it's kind of self-explanatory. So one of the reasons I do so many classes is to really just to try to keep inspiring people to practice. And what you will find, and perhaps hopefully you found, is that through the daily application of working with mindfulness, daily application of working with Dharma, that the good times, the joy, starts to become a more regular experience. And there's less of the turmoil, and there's less of the conflict. And this is true. This is really, really true. When we're in the middle of a negative state, we tend to think that that's what we are, that this is what our life is. And it's not true. So as we, especially with this practice where we've been working with awareness, working with learning to connect with that aspect of our beingness, we start to have a natural joy and a natural clarity that just starts to express itself. So even though there are those ups and downs, which there will be, there's a growing faith, there's a growing confidence in the practice. This is really, really important. And um, it should be a joyful thing. It should be a joyful thing. It shouldn't be a chore. It shouldn't feel like work. And if it does feel like work, it's probably we're not working with the mindfulness enough. When we work with the mindfulness throughout the day on a daily basis, then the joy just opens up. It's there. It's an expression of the non-clinging heart. It's an expression of clarity. And it's not like we have to be tight with the mindfulness. We just have to be present with ourselves. We have to be present when it's feeling good, and we have to be present when it's feeling bad. But to know that the point is being present. And being present, being mindful, being present brings us to this presence, this sense of presence. So we begin to develop great confidence that in the practice. So when you are having a bad day, you're having a bad day. But the next day is going to be different unless you cling to the day before. So through all the ups and downs, we have this mat, if you will, this cushion, if you will, of awareness to rest in. Have you found that? Have you found that in yourselves? And I think most of you would say yes. So whether we're in retreat, whether we're in class, post-retreat, after class, we bring this presence in. We allow it to flourish. We allow it to flourish. We don't stop it. The word that we use, that is used a lot, is undistracted and distracted. When we're undistracted, we're in that presence. When we're undistracted, we're not caught up in the thinking mind. It's not that the mind's not thinking, but we clearly see that there's something else there. And we begin to see that it's there in a moment. In a moment, it's there. The practice, the formal practice, is connecting with that and developing strength in that. So that when we are moving through the day and we are caught up and we are in an unpleasant state of mind or unpleasant situation, our heart knows, this is not me. And the undistracted is there in a moment, in an instant. we begin to see that the constant activity, the constant movement in the mind, in some ways, it's just very, very superficial. There's this constant activity, this constant movement. It's like you wake up in the morning, you walk out your front door, and there's stuff happening, you know? Walk out your bedroom door, there's stuff happening. It's constant most of the time. But we're okay with it because in that place of presence, we see how it's constantly changing, how it's constantly changing. And the stories we tell ourselves are false stories. They're not true. The mind, the conditioned mind, is in a state of not seeing. The conditioned mind is in a state of being distracted. There's a place in our experience, and there's a word for it, but I'm not going to say it because I might get it wrong. But it's the point. There's a point when the mind gets really, really quiet and we get really, really still. We get to a point where we see the first step of the mind. We see this movement from undistracted to distracted, from presence to not presence. It's like we're in this pure state, and then the mind creates a story. But there's a point in our experience, if we look closely, there's a point where there's the appearance. There's the appearance of thought. There's the appearance of anything, actually. But there's a place in us, there's a place in our experience where you could say the experience is going from the unborn to the born, the unconditioned to the conditioned. That place is very, very still. That place is very, very still. But this idea really points to a very fundamental aspect of our mind. Sometimes they talk about being and non-being. What does that mean? Or when they say the unborn, what does that mean? It's that moment in the experience. So this practice of awareness, this practice of developing the ability to see or to feel or intuit this presence, brings us to this point, allows us to have a sense of it. And sometimes it's not a full-blown experience. Sometimes it's an intimation. And I'm not talking about making something up in your head about it. It's like if you look from the place of the undistracted, you see it, or you feel it, or you intuit it. So we develop the practice at this level. That's why we sit. That's why we do the samatha practice. So we develop enough quietness to be able to come to this point. We learn to rest there. We learn to bring ourselves there. We learn to recognize it. And if this is true, what are we doing most of the time with our minds? Right? We're grabbing on, we're clinging. We're getting lost in the storyline. But when we really know this to be true, when we really know this to be true, then we become a lot more okay with whatever comes up. And so that's the training, right? As we work with mindfulness, we work with those repetitive habitual patterns. But there's a point where we're no longer so concerned with them. We're no longer so beholden to them because we know that there's something else here. So we develop the ability to recognize that. And the instructions is not to be distracted, not to be pulled away. And when we're distracted, we recognize it. And when we do that enough times, when that experience begins to manifest in the heart, then things become a lot easier. Because we're not so concerned with what the mind is telling us. We're still very careful in how we move through the world. We're still very careful about where we put our minds. I read a quote the other day and it said, the mind is like tofu. Sure, you have days your mind feels like a big block of tofu. Mine does. No, that's not the point. This quote is, the mind is like tofu, and whatever you marinate the mind in, that's what it's going to taste like, right? So we have to be really careful with how we move through the day, what we put our attention towards, what we spend time with, because that's what we are marinating the conditioned mind in. So what we do, who we hang out with, what we hold on to, is very important. So we try to, as we move through the day, we try to marinate the mind in a good sauce, good activities, wholesome pursuits. And that's very, very important as well. But all this allows the mind to settle enough so we can come to that one point. We can come to that one place. And I think some of you, or maybe most of you, know what I'm talking about. And the practice is just gaining confidence in that, is gaining confidence. So so that's that. Um, I just wanted to talk a little bit about working with the breath as well this evening. In the last little while, I've been giving out instructions to work with the hara, to work with the rise and fall in the abdomen. But not everybody's going to connect with that. With some people, it's going to be the nostrils. With some people, it's going to be the diaphragm. That's okay. The most important thing when we're doing the samatha practice is the development of calm, is the development of calm. I also like to incorporate in the practice at some point, working with the breath and moving through the entirety of the body, which I think is a way of working with the energy body, which is a way of purifying the energy body. Working with the hara is a really interesting way to do that. But also working with the breath anywhere, and then opening up the flow to the entirety of the body is also a really interesting way, a very effective way to do that as well. So don't get caught up in where you should be placing your attention. Place your attention that gives you the greatest access to calm. That's what's important. Because the calm, the samatha, is the door we walk through to bring us to this place where the mind is quiet and still enough that it can see its spaces. its foundation, or if you will, that point of appearance. That's where we're heading. That's what's important. So the development of calm through our daily life and the development of calm through working with the breath is really important. It's important because it brings us to this other place, this ability to look, this ability to connect, this ability to see this presence. And then when we see this presence, we remain undistracted. In this place, we clearly see the rise and fall of appearances. We clearly see the birth and death of appearances. We clearly see that point, that initial point of arising. And we begin to intuit, we begin to recognize that sense of the unborn and the born, the being and the non-being. And that is revealed in a deep, deep way, in a deep silence.